2019. What a crazy and amazing year. I have never done so much, had so many great experiences, and met so many great people in 1 year in my entire life. 2019 was the year I rode a mountain bike outside of Florida for the first time. I even traveled halfway around the world to Japan, where my plan was to ride downhill while I was there, but unfortunately I got injured pretty much the day before I went to Japan. I also rode in 3 different states outside of Florida. Twice in North Carolina, once in West Virginia, and once in Arizona. I live in South Florida in Fort Lauderdale, so leaving the state, just packing up and going, is not that easy. My first trip of the year didn't include mountain biking, but I was in the mountains. Almost every year since I was a teenager, my family would take a trip out west to go skiing. This year was a trip to Breckenridge, Colorado. I spent 4 days skiing and snowboarding. We had powder for the last 2 days, and the snowboarding was absolutely epic. My next trip was to Sedona, Arizona. It was my first trip out of Florida to go mountain biking. The trails, the views, the experience was out of this world. It was the first time I had to climb longer than 10 seconds. While I was in Sedona, I got a phone call from a friend inviting me to go to the Seth's Bike Hacks Spring Smash Ride in May. I said I was in. Before the Seth trip, I took a road trip to Tallahassee where I switched from clipless to flat pedals. It didn't take long to get used to the flat pedals before I realized I didn't need clipless anymore. Tallahassee is the hilliest place I know of, so I rode there for about 3 days trying to get some miles under my belt before I headed to the real mountains of North Carolina. My next trip was in May to North Carolina with the Seth's Bike Hacks Spring Smash. God dang, that's a tongue twister. 3 days of climbing mountains and monster downhills. I met new friends and had great food and beer. I was able to put my new flat pedal skills to use, and by the end of the trip, flat pedals were a non-issue for me. I could jump, bunny hop, drop, climb with no thoughts of my pedals whatsoever. Next up in the year was a trip to Santos in Ocala, Florida, to the Fat Tire Fest. This is where I met some of my new good friends, and also where I tackled a major hurdle in my biking skills. I went to Santos alone, and not knowing any of the trails, I jumped in a line of guys and asked if I could tag along. As with most mountain bikers, they said, "Sure, come along, we don't mind." And from that moment, I had made new friends. I'd never done drops before, and at Santos they have some pretty big ones, D1 through D4. D1 being the smallest, but still something to get the blood pumping. So I hiked up my skirt and took a leap of faith. Once I hit it, I couldn't stop. Climbed back up, and at least 20 times over. I did the drop over and over. During the summer months, me and my family often take a fishing trip. This summer we chartered a boat out of Key Biscayne, hit the open waters for some mahi-mahi. My next trip was back to North Carolina, but I don't think I recorded any video. I think I just wanted to enjoy the ride. I headed to Squatch Bike, which is in Brevard County. I met James, the owner, where I rented an Ibis Ritmo. What a great bike. That's my dream bike of next. James was awesome. He offered to take me to some trails and show me around. If you end up in Pisgah, North Carolina, stop in and say hi to James and the crew. Grab a beer at Squatch Bikes. The next trip was going to be my first downhill mountain bike park. And it was for about 2 hours. After about a 16-hour drive with 6 of us in a van, we hit Snowshoe Mountain in West Virginia. We hit a few runs until some locals led us to a small drop. Me being the crazy man, I said, yeah, I'd try it. Well, I hit it, landed, bounced, and then high-sided off the bike. It felt like I broke both wrists, a toe, and some ribs. I was able to stand up and slowly make my way down the mountain. This 2-day trip ended early for me, but I can't wait to go back. 2 days after getting home from West Virginia, I was on another plane heading for Japan. This trip was supposed to include a Japan mountain bike downhill park, but due to my carelessness and my injuries, I could barely walk. But once in Japan, I hobbled around, and day after day I was able to move better. Japan was absolutely an amazing experience. I already have it on the calendar for this year, October 2020. And yes, there will be mountain biking this time in Japan. 2019 was beyond amazing. The trips, the new friends, and the experiences all around the world. 2020 is already stacking up to be a great year. I have already been to Tampa for a 2-day mountain bike trip. Vegas, Colorado, North Carolina, and Japan are already planned for 2020. So if you'd like to see the next adventures coming up in the following year, please subscribe, and I will see you all on the trails.